I wanted to welcome you all. My name is Christopher Dickey. I'm the foreign editor of the Daily Beast, and I wanted to welcome you all to this dinner for the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism, which doesn't sound like it's a lot of fun, but it is really extremely interesting and absolutely vital to the future of, frankly, of world peace at this point. And I'm not going to go on at great length, at least not at this point, but I wanted to introduce first our hostess, Her Excellency, Alia bint Ahmed Al Thani, who is the permanent representative of Qatar to the United Nations, and who has made a powerful mark here in New York, and has been, I think, absolutely instrumental in supporting a lot of the work that the Center for the Study of Violent Extremism has done. I'm not going to go on and on. I think she has some opening remarks, and I'd like to invite you, Madam Ambassador, to come up and make them.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for this kind introduction. Of course, I'm Alia Al Thani, the permanent representative of the State of Qatar to the United Nations here in New York. I would like to welcome all of you, and of course, I'm very honored to collaborate together with Ms. Anne Speckhard, Director of the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism, and organizing this evening gathering during high-level week. Of course, as you know, we kickstart a very important week where we deliberate many important topics, including how to counter violent extremism and to deal with the effects of terrorism around the world. Let me begin, of course, by stressing that Qatar believes that extremism poses a grave challenge to all societies. We have long alerted that no region, no country, no community is immune from violent extremism. It affects people around the world across race, religion, and different socio-economic backgrounds. Extremism is not inherent in a given religion or ideology. It is born out of social, economic, and political distortions. Children and young persons pay a very high price and direct price for the phenomena. Uprooting global extremism requires collective commitment and long-term strategy to address the circumstances leading to the emergence of extremism long before terrorist organizations have the opportunity to exploit it. Particular attention must be given to the special circumstances in the communities in which extremism emerges. We have often expressed our deep belief that security and law enforcement measures alone do not suffice to defeat this threat. Force only tackles the symptoms of the problem rather than addressing the factors driving participation in violent extremism and radicalization. In many instances, security responses further aggravate tensions and trigger more support for violent ideologies. An important element of countering violent extremism is prevention, dialogue, and trust. In our view, engaging communities and building the resilience is an extremely important component of any national and international effort to prevent and counter violent extremism. Local communities and families have an innovative ideas about how to prevent and counter radicalization to violent extremism among their members. And I mean, in this, when we talk about local communities and families, we've really witnessed this when we have, you know, Qatar, within our program of work, we have planned many events and functions where we have introduced many of those grassroots organizations that has been established by families of victims of terrorism and violent extremism, and we have seen how powerful the efforts of those grassroots organizations and individuals in tackling the root causes. Communities and families are also key to help to radicalize those that have already joined violent extremist groups, as I have mentioned. But also, and most importantly, they might be extremely effective in rehabilitating and reintegrating youth back into their communities, back into their societies. They are also extremely important in producing and amplifying new, authentic, and new narratives. Most importantly, of course, we must be able to inspire and motivate young men and women, and to build their resilience to violent ideas and behavior. This is why in Qatar we prioritize programs and initiatives that emphasize youth skills development, employment facilitation programs, and most importantly, education. Combating and uprooting violent extremism also depends on building robust and effective partnerships, bringing together governments, civil society, and private sector, the UN system, and communities. Given the importance of these partnerships, I'm very pleased to inform you of a key partnership between Shariat. Shariat is a foundation that is based in Qatar, and they have been established almost 10 years ago. Actually, this fall we will be celebrating its 10th anniversary. Shariat Foundation, it's an Arabic word that means to connect, connecting young people to their communities, to the workforce. So this foundation is basically supporting efforts in providing opportunities for young people in the Arab region. And now it's even looking at beyond the Arab region and looking at Islamic communities and of course, many parts of the world. Shariat last year have established an important partnership with the UN Counterterrorism Office at the United Nations to implement a joint project dedicated to protecting youth from the surge of extremism and enhancing their abilities. It's a very important project. I mean, I cannot talk about it enough, but I really encourage you to look it up and see the wonderful work this organization has accomplished in the last 10 years. Qatar has fully and effectively implemented all of its international obligations in accordance with the international treaties and conventions, the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, and Security Council resolutions relating to the fight of terrorism. Of course, this is a very legal platform that we very much fully respect and comply with, and we encourage many countries to make effective implementation of. The State of Qatar also has invested in bilateral and multilateral cooperation within the framework of the Global Counterterrorism, the GCTF, the well-known forum. In this regard, we have signed several bilateral agreements and memorandums of understanding with many countries, and we actively participate in of course, the US-led international coalition to combat ISIL, which, as you know, has achieved significant successes. Our cooperation with the United States in the field of counterterrorism is also effective and robust. We have signed, of course, a memorandum of understanding on combating terrorism in July 2017, and actually it is the first bilateral memo to be signed within the GCC cooperation, within the GCC region when it comes to countering and fighting the financing of terrorism. It's a very important step for us, and we think it will encourage other countries in the region to come forward and do the same. Very recently, of course, there is a dialogue between Qatar and the United States, which was held in Doha in September 2018 on the same subject. We are very much actively, of course, engaged in many bilateral agreements when it comes to issues relating to counterterrorism. Sorry to prolong, but I wanted to have this opportunity, of course, to outline very important achievements my country has been involved in when it comes to countering violent extremism. It's a subject that is very dear to us. I mean, for us in Qatar, we have very much concentrated on providing education. Education is the key element to counter violent extremism and counter terrorism. And for us, we have invested throughout the years in this area. Qatar is one of the leading countries when it comes to implementing and promoting the right to education, and mainly to women and children and girls. And I think this is something we're very proud of, and I'm sure nothing will stop us to do as much as we can. I'm sure you're very much aware the unfortunate the unfortunate situation the Gulf is going through today, it has a lot to do with how much we have progressed, how much we have been able to situate ourselves as a beacon of hope in the region. We will continue to resist the wave to take us back. And I don't think anything will stop us. I think this crisis, last year, the unlawful blockade that has been enforced on Qatar by countries that we have considered them as brothers and neighbors, has to do with that, has to do with not wanting us to progress, not wanting us to take a step forward, not wanting us to be as an open society as we are, as a country that has hosted many media outlets, have hosted many think tanks. We've really provided the space for that. And I think we will continue doing the good work we do with the good encouragement of organizations and individuals like your distinguished selves. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I very much look forward to the discussion today, and I'm very sorry for prolonging. This is we're UN officials, and we take too much time sometimes in trying to explain a case or a situation, but I really wanted to take this opportunity to give you and provide you with information as much as I can. Thank you so much again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think that's a wonderful picture of what Qatar is trying to do, countering violent extremism and terrorism generally. I think one of the things that's striking about Qatar is the intellectual creativity and the social creativity that's gone into building your society, your modern society in Qatar, the emphasis on education, on medicine, on all kinds of things that benefit the people of Qatar and lots of other people too who go there. To study and to heal and to build their lives. It is unfortunate that there is a situation in the Gulf where Qatar has come under enormous pressure, not because it has made enemies, but because it's made so many friends. I've never seen a country that could have so many friends who are among themselves enemies. So it's quite a striking thing. And I think also something else that needs to be said tonight is also how powerful the role of women is in Qatar. You have tremendous figures among the women of Qatar who have helped guide the nation, and I think everybody knows that in the country and around the world, as a matter of fact. So I want to thank you for those remarks, and I think that's a great scene setter for tonight. I'm going to introduce Anne Speckard in a moment. But you should know that I first met Anne in Brussels in 2016 when the airport had been blown up and the metro had been blown up, not far from where you and I had dinner. We were both talking on NBC at that point. And I thought, who is this woman who knows so much about terrorism? And she explained that she'd been, well, you know, talking to a lot of terrorists. And I thought, okay, you don't look like a terrorist, but clearly you talk to a lot of them and learn from them what their stories are and how they feel, what they believe, and how those beliefs can be used to inform the struggle against terrorism. And it seemed like a hugely worthwhile project because so much of the discussion of terrorism going way, way back, long before 9/11, is a discussion of absolutes. You don't understand the people, you brand people as terrorists, you walk away from them, you turn your back on them, you try to kill them, but you don't try to understand them. And you can't ultimately fight them, especially in today's world, especially in a world of social media, unless you do understand them, unless you do listen to them, which is exactly what Anne has been doing and her colleagues have been doing at the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism. She's now going to show us a film. Are you going to show us a film, Anne? That gives an idea of what exactly they have been doing. How many people have you interviewed now? 94. 600 terrorists over the years and 94 from ISIS. Wow, you could have a great cocktail party with all those people. Are any of them out of jail? Some of them must be out of jail now, yeah. Anyway, I won't go on. I'd like to invite Anna up here to tell you firsthand what it is she does and to show you what she does.
So I'll send him his cash payment soon. Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. Let's see. Could we start the slides, please? So as Chris said, well, number one, we're a group, and I put a number of our names from ICSV up here because it's not just me. I get to talk, and I've maybe been doing this the longest, but there's a number of us at ICSV that are working on this, and you'll see that as we go along. If you could go to the next slide. Oh, I guess I'm in charge of the slides. Let me see. Do you want to move the slides? Go ahead to the next one. So I've interviewed about 600 terrorists over my career. I've been doing this for about 20 years. And if they're dead, suicide terrorists, I interviewed their family members, their close associates, their hostages, sometimes their senders. And as Chris said, I was always trying to understand what puts a person on the terrorist trajectory. And I came up with the idea of what I call the lethal cocktail of terrorism. And there's never just one thing. Well, occasionally there's one thing that puts a person on a terrorist trajectory, but there's a group that's involved. The group has to organize it, has to create a target, has to finance it, has to talk you into it, give you some justification so that you'll jump over a moral barrier. There has to be an ideology. And it's usually for this cause you can do things that you normally wouldn't do. You can go on a subway and blow people up. You can take a knife and stab them. You can take a truck and run them all down. Because for this cause and because of these grievances, it's justified. And of course, we all know that it's never justified. But terrorist groups are very persuasive and argue that. And then there's also social support. We all look around, we probably do this in the room. Look how we're all dressed pretty similarly, right? We all resonate off of other people's judgments of what's appropriate behavior. And terrorists are no different. So when a lot of social support starts rising up in favor of terrorism, people start to think, okay, this is appropriate, this is correct, I can join. And they do. And nowadays, we see that if you have a phone, you have social support. You can be brought into a cell of people very quickly. If they catch you on Twitter, if they catch you on Facebook, wherever you're hanging out virtually, suddenly they can coalesce a whole group around you. And these people can be reflecting to you, yes, taking a truck and running people down in New York is a good idea. In fact, that would be being a servant of Allah. They can, tell you this. And then there's whatever is inside the person. And I'm a psychologist, so I'm always really interested in the psychology of terrorists. And if you're in a conflict zone, it's pretty simple. It's revenge and trauma-driven. And people will go seeking terrorist groups to be equipped to enact their revenge or to escape from their traumas, to get away from PTSD, to say, I've just had enough. Just let me go out as a martyr. If they begin to believe that it is martyrdom to kill other people as you kill yourself. In non-conflict zones, there's at least 50 variables, and I've written a lot on this, and my time's really short, so I can't go into it, but there's anger over geopolitics, a personal search for significance. We all want to be significant. We all want to be recognized. There's wanting purpose, wanting a positive identity, wanting adventure. What's more adventurous than taking off from Brussels and going to Syria? Running away from your problems. All of us at time to time seek a geographic relocation to get away from our problems. Falling in love, that's a real powerful one, actually. Anger over being marginalized or discriminated, that's just some of the possibilities, vulnerabilities, motivations. So if you'd go to the next slide. And sometimes it's real simple. We took this picture off a phone of a Syrian ISIS defector in Turkey. My colleague Ahmed Yallah got this picture. And You know, I don't know if these people joined only for the money, but some people do tell us, I joined for the money. But anyway, we've been looking for a long time at what are the necessary and sufficient components to make a terrorist. But we also have to look at what will unmake a terrorist, what will prevent a terrorist, what can we do? And the ambassador told us exactly. We need to look not at the symptoms, but at the root causes and to begin to address them. If you go to the next slide, please. We've also been working a lot with UN Women, and we have Natasha here to speak a little bit about that, and trying to look at what are the gendered aspects. Why do women get up and travel to Syria? Why do women strap on suicide vests and explode themselves? What are the differences? How are women seduced into a group or coerced into a group? Is it different than how the men are? If you go to the next slide, please. In my view, ISIS has been peddling a utopian dream. And you see on the one list a whole group of grievances: occupation, violence, torture, rape, death. I mean, there are regimes that are torturing, right? I mean, our own country was torturing. We had pictures from Abu Ghraib that proved it. Loss of land and resources, sectarian fighting, corruption, marginalization and discrimination, frustrated aspirations. A lot of people are living with these very real grievances. And their countries aren't doing anything about it. Their governments are failing to address the real things in their lives that are troubling them, or that other people are witnessing, that, you know, they're sensitive, they care, they maybe have a bent towards leadership, and they're seeing these things happen to others, and they're upset about it, and they want to know, what can I do? Well, here comes ISIS and tells them, I have an answer for you, and I can give you dignity, I can bestow upon you belonging, I can give you significance, purpose, opportunity, and you can live by Islamic ideals. Of course, we know that's all false, but if you're young, naive, don't know any better, you might believe it. And a lot of this peddling the utopian ideal was over the internet. And it doesn't mean that people get into terrorism only over the internet. All of these things are multi-causal. But if you're hearing this whole thing about there's another way of living, there's a caliphate that's being built, you can be part of it, people will resonate to that. And we saw that. We saw 40,000 fighters go from 120 countries. So when that started up, we started asking ourselves, if you go to the next slide, please, what could we do about that? How could we do what we're doing, already interviewing terrorists, trying to understand their trajectories? How could we take what we're learning and try to use that to do a soft power approach to fight against terrorism? And our answer was, let's take their stories, because we know that people learn by story. Don't you remember in school, when they told you a story, it stuck? And public speakers are always told, tell a story. You know, they won't remember anything you said except the story of the person that you spoke about. Tell something real. Well, these people that have been in ISIS and walked away, that are defectors, returnees, prisoners, if you could get their stories, they're instructive, and they can be cautionary tales. Don't join. It didn't work out so well for me. Don't join. And we know that ISIS especially, but other groups too, were catching people on the internet by putting out this dream and watching, did you retweet it? Did you share it on Facebook? I'm forgetting all the social media things you can do. Did you like? And if you did, I put this big net out, and I can find out who's responding to my materials. Yeah, you know this. And can we do the same thing with counter messaging? So we decided to try, and I'll tell the truth, we're not as good as ISIS. They're really organized. They're really good. They follow you. They follow who follows them. They swarm in on those people, and they try to catch them and try to move them along the terrorist trajectory. But we are good that we go out and capture stories. We get them on video. Zach Badorf is here. He changes our interviews into these amazing products. You're going to see a couple of them tonight. And Ardian, who you met, who hasn't come in yet, because I guess people are still coming late, has traveled to all these different places in the world capturing these stories. And we create counter stories that tell about what motivated me to join a terrorist group, why I joined, what I liked about ISIS in the beginning, how I heard about them, how they recruited me, how I traveled, what happened when I got there. What did they do with me? Did they train me? Did they give me weapons training? Did they give me Shariat training? What did I continue to like? And what did I hate? What made me leave and defect from the group? Or what made me return to my country and maybe still like the group? Or if I got imprisoned, how do I feel about them now? If you go to the next slide. And this is where I really want to thank Qatar, because we have funding from a number of different people, but our main funding right now is from the Embassy of Qatar in the US, and we're very, very grateful for that. And we were doing fine, but now our project is on steroids, and we're very proud of that. So if you go to the next slide, and then I'm going to ask you to come back. Yeah, this one. We have interviewed 94 ISIS cadres, defectors, returnees, prisoners. We've interviewed 10 al-Shabaab, and that's with our Kenyan partners, who you're going to hear from tonight. We've interviewed 25 family members of ISIS, 2 ISIS al-Qaeda ideologues. With Zach's kind help, we've created 79 counter-narratives. Some of them are still in process. And I think it's 60 that are already up on YouTube. And then now if you go back to the last slide, this is our YouTube channel. And we beg people, so any of you that are fluent in other languages, if you'd like to give any of your time to ICSVE, each video is maybe 3 minutes long. It's got a short little script. And we ask diplomats, people that are able to do it, please can you change this into your language, just by writing. And we get subtitlers so that we have anti-ISIS videos in the same languages that ISIS is recruiting in, which is about 21 languages. And we also create a study guide for every video. Those are still being processed and will be put together into a training manual soon. And we go out and we train teachers, prison workers, police, CVE professionals, how you can use these things. Because we know that people don't only learn by logic. I mean, maybe the people in this room, because you're all accomplished professionals, but a lot of people learn by emotion and emotionally compelling material. And we know that people are on YouTube all the time now. They love to watch film. And that's what we're trying to create, and creating a message where the person tells their narrative. On our study guide, we provide a transcript, we provide discussion questions, we have Islamic scriptures that show what ISIS is claiming, or al-Shabaab, or whatever the group happens to be, and what the refutations are. So now if you go ahead 2 slides, please. So we've also been very privileged to make country partnerships. So you see Kenya, northern Syria, they call themselves Rojava, the Syrian Democratic Forces, Iraq, Kosovo, Albania, have all let us into their prisons. And we've all been able to interview ISIS prisoners, which has been quite amazing. And we also work with the US, Canada, Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, Kyrgyzstan, Thailand, Malaysia, and the EU on distribution, on training, and different ways of working with these videos. So we're managing as a small center to have a global impact, and we hope that we're having success. So if you go ahead to the next slide, please. So the way we measure our success is face-to-face interventions. We held focus groups in Jordan, in Zarqa. That's where Zarqawi was from. If you know who Zarqawi is, he was the head of al-Qaeda in Iraq. In Kosovo and Central Asia. In US, you're going to hear from Mohammed tonight about the focus groups that he's running with the Somali American community in San Diego. We also train teachers, police, as I've told you. We were really quite amazed when I was speaking in Thailand to have someone raise their hand and say, I really love these videos, they really work. I'm a prevent counselor in London, and I had a 13-year-old that was going to go to Raqqa. And he came for his 3rd interview, and he kept saying, I'm going to go to Raqqa. And the counselor, whose name is Omar, said, I was really scared he was going to go to Raqqa. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe I should call the police. But this 3rd session, I decided, I remembered, Anne, about your videos, and I showed him a video of a 13-year-old, and this kid was 13. And it was a kid that had been in ISIS, told his story, we had a video of it. And after the video finished, and, it's a little ruffian, so he turned to Omar and he goes, "Is that for real?" And Omar said, "Yeah, that is a real video. My colleague made it. This is his story. Do you want it to be your story?" And he said, "I'm not going to go." And that's so cool, right? It's only one person, but it's one person turned around. And same thing, we were in prison in Suleymaniya, Ardian and I, and we were interviewing an ISIS emir. He was responsible for 50 deaths. He'd sent kids with suicide bombs to kill other people. And he started talking about the slaves in ISIS and the slave women and how you can do what you want with them. And I got scared. I don't usually get scared, but I got scared. And I was typing my notes on the computer, and I said, wait a minute. I have 2 ISIS guys that disagree with you. I have them on video. Will you watch their testimonies? And he said, sure. And I thought he was in shackles, and the Peshmerga guy that was translating for us held my computer, and I thought it's going to go flying across the room. And he watched these videos. He got totally engrossed in them. And when he finished watching them, he started saying, "We were wrong." He hung his head in shame. He said, we had internal debates about some of these things. We gave a bad face to Islam, what we did. And before, he'd been all bravado, really scary guy. And I thought, wow, these work for intervention. So we know they work, and they're being used on 5 continents right now by counselors, police, teachers, CVE professionals, and so on. If you go to the next slide, all I'm going to say is we've got a lot of publications that show our online results. Facebook has partnered with us, and we're very proud of that as well. So we've got these wonderful partners, Qatar and Facebook. And Facebook has allowed us to distribute with ads our videos all around the world. So right now, I think we have 20 campaigns running right now in Kenya, in Iraq, in the Far East, in Kyrgyzstan, in Belgium, in Netherlands. They're in their own languages, and they're coming up on people's Facebook feed. And it's up to them if they click on it or not. But then if they do click on it, they watch this video, which they probably think is an ISIS video because our videos are made to look as though they're from ISIS. They have a picture that's from ISIS propaganda as their identifying screenshot, and they have names that are ambiguous, like the glorious cubs of the caliphate. And but if they watch it, they're getting a real story that's a counter-narrative instead of pulling them in. And then please go to the next slide. We recently started, again with Zach's help, something called therealjihad.org, which is a website that has Islamic arguments, so it's ideological arguments, but also stories and all our films, so that they can click at the end of the video and go to the Real Jihad. And you'll hear from our Kenyan colleague about what happened in just only 1 month. And I think we have 14,000 clicks already on the Real Jihad website, and the only way you hear about it is if you watched one of our videos. So people are going looking for more, which is very exciting. So if you would just go to the last slide, I'd like to show you our team members who allow themselves to be shown. We also have other team members who are too afraid. One of them is in Iraq, and so you don't see all the pictures here. We have a wonderful team, really grateful to all of them. And I want to go quickly, so I'm going to show you our latest video. It's a story from our last trip into northern Syria, working with the Syrian Democratic Forces. And they let us in their prisons. We interviewed on that trip, I think it was 7 men, most of them Europeans, and 5 women that had been in ISIS, all Europeans. And this is one of the European women. We renamed her. It's not her real name, but we renamed her Salma. She went naively into ISIS following her father. She's from Belgium. And she thought it was going to be a good thing. She didn't do her research ahead of time. Turned out horrible. And here's her story. If you can play the video, please. Thank you.
So my dad, he wanted to live the really Islamic life. My dad came first, and then he called me. He just said, life is better here, you can wear your whole hijab, and we're not oppressed here. Just that my dad said I'm not coming back was enough for me to come, actually. I never watched, and when my dad called me, I tried to watch on YouTube. I looked up like how is life in ISIS. There wasn't really anything on YouTube. And he convinced me to come, so I came. They entered me in a pickup, and they took me to a woman's house. In Bab Limon, I stayed for a week, and then they take me to Raqqa. The Raqqa is like a big house full of women. I told them I have my dad here, and they went up, looked up for him, and they brought him. My husband was a soldier in Iraq. When we got married, he went 3 times. And then he stopped going. He didn't like it anymore. He didn't like the way ISIS thinks. They have a problem in their religion, how they do stuff. Mostly they punish with death. It's the most common punishment. And after mostly 3 months of marriage, I got pregnant. He stopped going to work, and then we tried to get out of ISIS. But so many things happened. It's very difficult to get out. We're gonna cross the border. We went to the last point of last town. The problem is we're a lot, and Free Syrian Army was advancing, and everybody was evacuating from that little town. Us going to there was a little bit suspicious. And when we are going, there is a car of police that comes. They're saying to my dad, why are you taking your family? He's like, oh, just here. He's like, yeah, no, we know. And then they came and took my dad. They left us in a house first. They took my dad to prison. They interrogated him. And then they came and took us. They put us in prison, but then we needed to evacuate Al-Bab, so they evacuated and they took us to Raqqa. They wanted us to put us in a woman's house, but we women, we ran away. When they put my husband and my dad in prison, my dad, because he's older, he just stayed 2 weeks and he got out. But my husband, because he's younger, he stayed a long time. He stayed like almost 6 months. So my dad was like, yeah, no, I'm not staying here, let's go. So we started walking, and then they started shooting on us. They started shooting on us. They killed all the men. He died in front of me. I got a bullet in my back and a bullet other places. They came and interrogated me, like, why do you want to go? You should fear God. And I just said, yeah, a big mistake, just playing the game with them. And then I got out. They put me in a woman's house until my husband got out of prison. 2 months we stayed, and we got out. Of course it's hard. You want freedom. You want to go out. It's just psychological. It's difficult. I have a son and I'm pregnant 7 months. But being in prison with your kid is worse, I think, than being in prison alone. Because you see him suffer. He's 1 year and a half, so he doesn't really understand. So he thinks it's fun. He goes out. He sits in front of the tent, takes stones and starts throwing on everyone. So it's all fun. But for me, really, just see him like this. He almost needs to go to school. Normally he needs to play with stuff. They can say it's Islam, but it's not really. No, they're bad Muslims. They're not Muslims. Don't even call them Muslims, please. That just gives a bad name to Muslims. When you go to Syria, They hate us. Yeah, they hate them. They hate ISIS. I heard about slaves. I heard about how they treat slaves. Yeah, that was also a reason. That's why I'm saying they're wrong. Because how they treat slaves was not on the Islamic way of treating slaves. Of course I want to go home. I want to go to my mother. My sister got so many kids, I don't even know them. My family doesn't know my care yet. If they put me in prison, that's the consequences of my mistakes, so I will have to live with them. Don't even look up ISIS, forget ISIS.
So that's what we do. And that one's a little bit long. So a lot of them are just 3 minutes, and they're all up on YouTube. So if you want to watch any, and you'll see one more tonight. Thank you.
Well, as Anne would say, wow, that was something. A very convincing counter-narrative, at least to me. I'm sure it would convince many young women who would be thinking of going to join ISIS. But somebody who can really talk about that is Natasha Lenovo, who is coordinator for the Community of Practice and Outreach, Women, Peace, and Security at UN Women, which is a real UN kind of name for an organization. And she's going to talk about a gendered approach to preventing and countering violent extremism and the introduction of the new UN Preventing and Countering Violent Extremism curriculum in Europe and Central Asia. We'll get to this maybe a little bit more when it comes to our discussion there at the table, but I'll be interested to hear too, Natasha, about the role that women may sometimes play as instigators of terrorist action. Because in the years that I've been covering terrorism, it has struck me on a number of occasions that men were listening to women who were telling them they had to go out and maybe even be martyrs, which I guess is one way of getting rid of a husband you don't want. But in any case, Natasha, please come on up.
Good evening. Thank you so much. Those videos were really inspiring. The story of how you're going and getting the interviews of the people who are exactly the people we need to hear from, I think is really inspiring, but also we need to do so much more of that. So thank you so much, distinguished guests, colleagues. Thank you to Anne. Thank you to the International Center for having me here tonight on behalf of UN Women. I'm really honored to be here tonight to talk about the role of gender in preventing violent extremism. It's really critical, and I'm also delighted to talk a little bit more about UN Women's work in Europe and Central Asia, which I'll get to in a little bit. I want to start by talking about a few of the things that we do know. So we know that women all over the world are deeply affected by violent extremism. We know that violent extremists and terrorists target women and girls. They target women's rights and gender equality. This is not new to us, unfortunately. The push and pull factors for women are really no different than those for men. Women also want adventure. They're not just jihadi brides. They're not just passive victims who accompany their husbands. They want adventure. They're seeking freedom from their own oppression. They want a purer version of Islam. They want all the kinds of things that men want. But there's also a gendered aspect where many women that we're hearing from want to exercise agency in a way that they're unable to do so in their own communities. And ISIS and groups like ISIS are very adept at selling an utopian version that appeals to women and men alike. We know that women are not just victims or perpetrators. We know they are working at the front lines to prevent and counter violent extremism, but we also know that despite this, very few efforts to prevent and counter violent extremism take gender into account. We know also that the very promotion of gender equality and women's empowerment is itself an effective countermeasure to the spread of violent extremism and terrorism. But we also know that for women and women's organizations to have a real role in preventing and countering violent extremism, we need more research and analysis on the women and women's involvement and gender in violent extremism, particularly on gender drivers and the role that gender in PCVE plays. And that includes more primary and secondary research. We need more inclusion of women in the development of PCVE programming, in actions and plans and interventions. We need a greater awareness among women themselves about the threats to PCVE in their communities, and we need more consideration about how poorly implemented PCVE programming can actually negatively affect women's rights. At UN Women, we have long seen links between gender inequality, violence, and conflict prevention. And in the past several years, we're pleased to have been increasing our focus in this area of work, working much more closely with other UN agencies, like my esteemed colleague here with CTED, OCT, and other agencies. And we're working with a growing number of scholars and experts like Anne, who are helping us to bridge some of the gaps that I just mentioned. We partner with local women and women-led organizations on the ground who are working in their communities, again, often at great risk to themselves and their families, to counter and prevent violent extremism, but also to de-radicalize and reintegrate those who have either escaped or become disillusioned with groups like ISIS and others. This work is critically important and needs much more support. To support these women and men who are working to prevent violent extremism on the front lines, strong training materials are essential. We're pleased to partner with Anne and her colleagues on developing a training manual on women and preventing and countering violent extremism in Central Asia. We anticipate this toolkit will launch by the end of the year, if not sooner. And I want to thank Anne and her colleague Ardian for their amazing work. And then also, if Grace is here, Grace Escamilla, she was the editor, and it's just really fantastic. This manual will give participants gender analysis tools that they can implement in promoting mainstreaming of gender into local PCVE initiatives, and we are certain that this is going to make those initiatives both more effective and better aligned with international norms and standards. I think that ensuring that our interventions when it comes to PCVE are gender responsive, inclusive, and aligned with international norms and standards, especially those around human rights, is key to meeting the challenge of violent extremism head-on and creating clear and credible alternatives for those who are at risk of becoming radicalized into violent extremism terrorist groups, as well as creating clear and credible pathways out of violent extremism. I'm really excited for the conversation that we will be having with all of you and to share more details about our work, but thank you.
So, all of this may seem to an American audience rather distant. Yes, the threat of terrorism is a threat that we all know about, and certainly so close to the anniversary of 9/11. But in fact, there are communities in the United States that might be particularly vulnerable to the kind of indoctrination that these sorts of videos are fighting against. And Mohammed Ahmed, who works with, I always get these, I'm terrible, it's like I'm dyslexic, the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism, has looked very closely at the issue of indoctrination of Somali communities in America, Somali immigrants and the children of Somali immigrants in America. And I think that we have a lot to learn from him, so I'll just invite him up straight away.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Okay, just making sure you guys are awake. My name is Mohammed Ahmed, and I am a research fellow with the International Center for the Studies of Violent Extremism. And my primary role is to take these counter-narrative messages into the communities here in the United States. And we decided to start off with the Somali American community, one, me being Somali, right? And two, because our communities here in the U.S. had its fair share of facing these challenges. Back home, obviously, you know, the destruction and the havoc that Al-Shabaab creates back home in Somalia, but also the recruitment that no one can deny here in the U.S. Just to give you sort of a glimpse, in San Diego, we had 5 members in the community who were indicted for material support. Right? We had 2 Somali gentlemen who were headed towards joining ISIS who were caught crossing the border to Mexico. We had Anwar al-Awlaki, right, who was also based in San Diego. So we can go on and on. Even a few of the 9/11 hijackers went to flight school in San Diego, right? So what I like about the work that Anna and her team is doing is they're not only just, you know, producing research. Like in our community, you know, the average Somali, even, you know, young, youthful person is not going to pick up, you know, a 300-page article or research paper and read. We as a Somali community, we're very rhetorical. We're known as the nation of poets. So having these videos creates something that I never thought was going to be possible, because our communities, you can't go to a coffee shop and be like, hey, what do you think about ISIS? Instantly, that individual is going to act like he's deaf. Why? Because of fear, right? Fear of entrapment. Is this guy an FBI agent? Is he a CIA agent, right? But really, radicalization affects our community. So I can't imagine a community that is vulnerable and is affected directly by extremism, but yet they're afraid to talk about it and have a discussion, right? So we're bringing in these videos, and instantly you start seeing the participants and members in the community who are having an open dialogue, right? We're creating a safe space that really doesn't exist. A lot of those bridges were burned by people who are not culturally sensitive, right, to approaching CVE work. So some of the things, for example, that we wanted to look at is, you know, how do our participants, what are their understanding about ISIS or Al-Shabaab, right? Are these videos effective, right? Are they really delivering the messages, right? They are. It's working. The participants that watch this video, one, I love it because it's 3 to 5 minutes, right? Right to the point. But participants are engaging in the conversation and they're sharing ideas that they may not feel comfortable if a law enforcement officer was there, right? Someone who was there that were outside of their community, right? Or out in the public. So some of the findings that we have is, one, it provides a safe environment for discussion, which is very, very important, not only for the Somali community, but any community, right? Somewhere where your ideas could be respected, your views could be heard, is what any human person would need. They also believe that these videos are highly engaging. I mean, some of the discussions could go on for hours and hours. Sometimes I just have to shut it down. I'm like, okay, it's time to go home, right? So once again, right, it it gives the opportunity to members in the community to talk about this. Also, we found that, you know, these messages are working. Some of our participants, they say, yes, I believe this message, right, if it came across someone who was joining Al-Shabaab or ISIS, that they believe that it would deter them, right? Another participant said, it may not cause everyone not to join, but at least it's going to make them stop and think again. And that's what we want, right? We want people to think, right, before they make these life-changing decisions. One of our visions is to also expand this to other cities across the country, right? So I am a Muslim. I am a practicing Muslim. I've been living in the community with the Somali community, all the Muslim community, right? When I talk to imams, for example, they say, you know, Muhammad, we're really, really concerned when the youth are not coming to the mosque because we're not giving them the message. We don't know who they're getting the message from. These videos are perfect because a lot of the time, I'm youthful myself, I spend so much time on my phone. We're meeting people where they're at, especially the youth, right? They're on the internet and they might come across this, right? Even if they're not joining or never had intentions of joining any extremist organization, right? But they might share it with someone. They might say, hey, check out this video. This is very interesting. So these videos, they are working, and there are other communities across the country and across the world who would really benefit from this. And I'm gonna just end it with this. As Somali, as you know, we're very poetic people, so I'm gonna say a saying that my dad always told me, "Farkaliya fal madagda." It means one finger cannot wash a face. If you don't believe me, try it. Right? So you need 5 fingers to wash a face. So my dad always told me that when you're engaging in any effort to make a difference, right, you need everybody's partnership. And this is what we see right now, right? It's not only our center, or it's not only Qatar, it's not only Kenya, it's everyone's responsibility. And if we work together to counter this, definitely we will have a better world. Thank you.
That was terrific, Mohammed. And very, very interesting indeed, and I think incredibly important work. I'm now going to ask David Shariat. Interesting name, David. It's, you must hear a lot about that. The representative from the UN Counterterrorism Committee Executive Directorate to come up. I asked him what they did earlier in the evening, and you basically are setting standards, showing people how governments, how best to combat terrorism or combat extremism. Is that a fair characterization? Good. You try to explain. Thank you very much.
So, my job here is to try to give some context to all the interesting presentations that we got together, and context will be a key word that I will use across all of the 5 minutes that I will speak. But not before thanking first the government of Qatar for hosting us today and for the generous support that you give to research around the world. I know you we learned that we give much support to the ICSVE, but we also know that through the Qatar Foundation, through research institutes in Qatar, much of cutting-edge work in counter-violent extremism is being done. You know, you're going to host in 1 month a big conference of researchers and policymakers from around the world to discuss this topic, and I will be very, very happy to go there, and it will be the first time for me to go to Qatar, so I'm very excited about that. Thank you also, Anne, for inviting CITED to come. And a few words about CITED. It's a small body, but with a long name and complex mission. What we are tasked to do is several things. First one is to assess how member states deal with counterterrorism, how their capacity is, how they implement the relevant Security Council resolutions. But more importantly, for the context of our conversations, CITED was tasked under the guidance of the Security Council Counterterrorism Committee to support the work of the global community in developing counter-messaging. And a key resolution in this was adopted last year. You don't need the numbers. And that paved the way for seated much deeper engagement in this topic. In a later resolution, the Council asked us not just to do that, but also to expand our work with the research community. And one thing that we have done in the last 2 years, but more intensively in the last year, is to expand our network with the research community through what we call the Global Research Network, because policymakers need the support of research. There's discussions in the UN. Some member states want to take discussion in one direction. Some member states want to take the agenda in a different direction. And it's very important, regardless of the direction they take, that they are faced and met with what research community thinks is the way to go. And we are very thankful to all the research institutions that are present here. There are a few of them that I can recognize, but to the many more that provide such an important research on the complex theme of counter-messaging. I want to start with what Mohammed concluded, and what I'll try to do is to bring the 4 presentations in some way together. And he started by saying this is a global phenomenon. And I think what we have seen through all the presentations, that it is indeed a global phenomenon, from Somali Americans in the US to people in Kenya, to people in the Middle East. Everywhere we can see people so easily being attracted to this violent extremism. And when we think of global challenges, the tendency is to think about global solutions. But one of the things that we have seen quite clearly here is that global solutions for counter-messaging would not work. We tend very often to use the metaphor of violent extremism as cancer. And if I may use this metaphor once again and take it one step further, you probably know that today, when thinking about medication to cancer, one of the key elements, one of the key innovations is what is called immunotherapy. Therapy that is targeting the specific individual, identifying sometimes his DNA, identifying the way his immune system works, and then trying through strengthening his immune system to make his body much more strong, much more capable to deal with the challenge of cancer. And I think this metaphor is clearly what was illustrated today by all the presenters. We have seen in Anne's presentation how different the drivers can be. For one person, it could be a humiliation that he suffered. For another, it would be something of geopolitical nature. For other, it could be a family situation. The gender dimension that Natasha mentioned could also have an impact. And if you want to deal with each of these multiple drivers, you have to develop medications that are targeting the individual and targeting his specific drivers. So context and understanding where one person comes from and what drives him to, or her, to the violent extremism is probably the key to solving or trying to mitigate the context. And for this, we need research. And the Security Council acknowledged, and in one of its resolutions dealing with it, that we need more research. We need continued research into the drivers of terrorism and violent extremism, because, again, it's a global issue, but only individual solutions. And the more we understand the challenge, the more we understand that we could not even group communities and say this community is driven by that, those individuals are driven by that. It's not going to work. We need individual approach that understands what exactly brought or brings that person to be so vulnerable to this ideology. And I think, again, many of the presentations we have seen were able to show us how we could reach success. And I think Tom was mentioning some of your approach that Kenya has made, and I think we could all learn from the Kenya experience. You mentioned the cyber caliphate, the growing use of the internet, and how that is something that requires its own research, because there is a difference between online recruitment and offline recruitment. They're working on two different levels and two different drivers, by the way. For some, the offline recruitment is based on social and networks and friendship and a kind of camaraderie that drives people to go to this direction. What is important, no less, to remember, and with that I conclude my own remarks, I think you've been a very patient audience, is that beyond every approach and beyond all the different approach, we have to remember that the remedy to this violent extremism is not by silencing any message. If we want to deal and to confront the ideology, we have to develop our own message. And I think there is a very famous saying, which I would use with your permission, and I think it's still very relevant to the concept of counter-messaging, is that the remedy to be applied for hate is more speech, not enforced silence. Thank you.
Well, we have about 30 seconds left, so we're going to extend the time about 15 minutes. And I'd like to invite all the participants back up onto the stage where you see your name. Well, you probably can't see where you're supposed to sit from up here, but I think you can figure it out. David, I thought that was a terrific summation of what we've heard tonight. I thought that was a terrific summation of what we've heard tonight. That's me.
Okay, this is Tom.
David's at the end.
Mohammed. Mohammed, you're here.
And I guess it's working. So I just have one question for the panel, and then we'll open, I think, to questions from the audience. But as I listen to everybody talking, and as I watch these counter-narratives, and also as I've covered terrorism over the years, I know this is not a word that's usually associated with terrorism, but it strikes me that the really important narrative for so many people, the really important question is the narrative of terrorism. And the narrative is often essentially romantic. And I don't mean in terms of getting married, although that may be part of it, but it is romantic in the sense that people identify with a narrative that makes them heroes, whether heroes in their religion or heroes in their society. I think it's no accident that the seminal ideological work of Al-Qaeda by Ayman Zawahiri is called Knights Under the Prophet's Banner. Not Knights N-I-G-H-T, but K-N-I-G-H-T. It's chivalric, it's heroic. And I wonder if that isn't the hardest thing in developing a counter-narrative, is to say, you know, you can't just say to young people, especially young men or young women, we don't want you to be heroes. You have to, I guess, show them how they can be heroes. And I just wondered if you would like to reflect on that.
I'll say something. Does this turn on? Is this on?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Didn't know. Oh, okay. That's why we created the realjihad.org, because we realized we're not as good as ISIS. ISIS is offering something really cool, right? You get to be a hero. You get to fight for justice and dignity and purpose, you know, for the downtrodden. I like that. You know, sign me up. But of course I hate ISIS. But we're trying to break that and say, no, that's not real. And the people that did it didn't like it and didn't work out for them. But then what are you left with? Nothing, right? what are you supposed to do now? And you're already riled up, you're upset about the grievances that ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab have shown you or that you're living yourself. So we created the realjihad.org, and it's just starting, and we're struggling with, you know, really thank you to Qatar that they did put our program on steroids, but we're struggling with that we're a small organization and we want to blow it up big, and we want to make the realjihad.org a place that you could go and you could find out, what can I do when I think that things are wrong? And my daughter is sitting here, she's somebody that's telling me all the time, the world is wrong, it's not right, it's not just. What should you do? So, you know, we have to provide answers, right? And I call that redirection. We have to redirect people. And that's one of the reasons, forgive me for saying this, but I like terrorists. I like their passion. I like that they want to change the world. Everything else I hate. But I like people that care. Because, you know, I hope you care too. But we have to give them something to do.
Thank you. Any? No?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, you know, anyone could be vulnerable. It doesn't really, it's not even based on your faith. I think, based on my experience, is that a lot of our youth who are disengaged are just looking for life opportunities. And it's like joining a gang. You relatively, you know, the recruitment is the same. They prey upon people who are vulnerable, who are looking for a way out, looking for a way to make their parents proud, or, you know, their community is looking down on them. And, you know, when someone is down on their luck, they tend to explore things and willing to take a risk, right, to see a change in their life. So it's something that we just need to be mindful that when we're telling people what, you know, don't join, but also tell them, but do this, right? Here's how you make, you know, a better Muslim community. This is how you should be engaged in civic engagement if you're, you know, frustrated with foreign affairs or whatever the case might be. So, and yeah, just the whole point, I think it's people, especially our youth, like, you know, they're looking just for life opportunities. They're willing to make a difference, and they have vulnerabilities, but people are good at exploiting that, and we just need to be good at, you know, building upon their strengths and directing them to be positive members of our community.
Natasha, is there a difference in the romanticism of the women?
Well, yeah. I think that actually it's a pretty universal feeling. So, and I actually think you ask a really important question. I'm a huge fan of Star Wars, and I suspect I'm probably not alone. And the reason why Star Wars is such a good and popular story is that it's an archetypal hero journey, right? It's this kind of story that cultures throughout the world and across time have told to help explain their myth. And that's really important. It tells a story of somebody who is bigger, part of something bigger than who he is. And we all want that, right? I'm lucky that I grew up in the context and situation that I did, that my hero journey was to join the UN. But it could have been a different kind of story for me. And it is a different kind of story for a lot of people. And so I think actually, when we think about how do we counter that kind of romantic narrative, it's the kind of work that Anne is doing, that others in here are doing, that the UN is doing is super important. But in a lot of ways, it really comes down to governments. Because if you're somebody who's disaffected, if you feel oppressed and marginalized, if the only hero journey you can imagine for yourself is to join a violent extremist group, the government has to be the one who can create the counter narrative for you that says, no, no, this is your hero story. Be a part of this bigger story. This nation that you belong to is the thing that's bigger than you, is your journey. And I think that what David said, how David closed his remarks, is absolutely key, that when governments react to terrorism or threats of terrorism and radicalization to violent extremism through oppression and through hard security responses where they aren't addressing the underlying grievances or perceived grievances. They're not giving those kinds of opportunities for that kind of narrative that's larger to be created. And I know I didn't answer your question specifically about women, but I think that for women it's no different. A woman no different than a man wants to be part of something bigger than herself. For most women, the way that we're socialized, that thing usually has to do with something romantic. So there is often something there, but not for all women.
I think we'll open this up to questions. Any questions?
Can you hear me?
You were all in a row,
I think
actually.
Natasha sort of started to answer the question I was going to ask, but Dr. Speckert is a mentor of mine, and I asked her a couple years ago, what is the difference diagnostically between a sociopath who commits acts of violence and a terrorist? And she answered me at this event when she was, I think it was her book release for Talking to the Terrorists. She gave me a very clear answer, which was not, I think, what most people would accept, but she said, in a way, terrorists have a moral code. They have grievances. A sociopath is just a sociopath. A terrorist has their set of grievances. So, Dr. Speckert, would you elaborate on what you told me for the audience here? And then, yeah, that's basically what I wanted to ask.
Well, Sasha has a good memory, and yeah, terrorists are really different than ordinary criminals, because ordinary criminals are greedy and want to enrich themselves. Terrorists usually want to change their communities. They want to address grievances that are bigger than just something that's happening to them. And it might not even be happening to them. It might be only happening to other people that they feel a kinship to. And that's the part that I do admire, because we should all care so much, but the methods that they engage in are absolutely wrong. But it's not being a psychopath. A psychopath has no moral code and is just self-serving, where a terrorist is trying to serve his community, but is very deluded in believing that attacking innocent civilians is the way to do it.
Back here? No, it's you with the microphone in your hand.
Thank you. I'm Kent Davis-Packard from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, and I'm really interested in how we saw the two videos. I'm wondering, are there some videos where they're talking specifically about the grievances caused by governments, and what, if any, is your dialogue like with governments? When you say you want to address root causes, I would think you might have some engagement with governments. Thank you.
Sure. A lot of the videos the people talk about, especially the Iraqis, we were allowed into the prison in Iraq, and a lot of the Iraqis, Sunnis, say that ISIS came, particularly in Mosul, the people that we interviewed in Mosul, or in Baghdad, but they were from Mosul. ISIS promised us we'd have a Sunni state. ISIS promised us that we would have our rights restored. And as they're speaking, you know, I feel pity just to think that they thought that this horribly brutal, un-Islamic, corrupt organization could give them answers. But I also feel sad that the government of Iraq needs to deliver. And I think they're saying themselves that they're corrupt. And you know, they need to clean their act up, and they need to be, you know, truly pluralistic and fair. Otherwise, these groups are going to continue to exist. And Artie and I were in Baghdad. We were so upset. We landed on the day that they declared victory, and the guys told us, you can't go in the prison, it's a holiday. And we're like, oh, yay. So we went out and observed the holiday, which was really interesting, but we were ticked because we were there for research interviews. But I guess we did a different kind of research. But has ISIS been defeated? Has ISIS been defeated in Iraq? I mean, Chris, you know, you're following that.
No, but I do think there is an element That's interesting. I used to have as a sort of a rule of thumb on terrorism that most terrorists were motivated by three elements. One was testosterone, a lot of young men with a lot of energy. Second was narrative, which we talked about. But the third was theater. This worked very neatly out to TNT, you see. But the theater is important. And the idea that you can project yourself on the world stage by blowing yourself up, by being the violent jihadist, I think actually, in an ironic way, terrorism became so commonplace that you couldn't do that anymore. It's not exceptional to blow yourself up. You're just another kid blown to smithereens. Nobody remembers your name. And I think that's important in fighting the narrative. Say, nobody's going to remember you. Nobody's going to care, except the people you kill.
Okay, but Natasha, that brings up another issue of gender, because we know when the Chechens took over the theater and everybody watched 40 terrorists, 20 of them women. Why did 20 women go to the theater? We're fascinated with women when they enact violence. And probably because we all had mothers and they could take us out, right? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of scary. It's way back here in your mind, you know, is she going to take me out now? And the violence of women is fascinating, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's something that is still so exceptional because it defies our stereotypes of what women are capable of, what women want, what their roles are. And like I said, I think for so many women, it's just as the draw to the adventurism, the draw to being on the battlefield is just as strong for men.
But the numbers of women who are suicide bombers is much lower. And there are some organizations like Boko Haram that now use a lot of women and little girls to carry out suicide bombings. Even the sensationalism of that has subsided. And we also have a long record of women suicide bombers, dating back at least to the days in Lebanon when we first saw them, or in India for Rajiv Gandhi. So I think the exceptionalism of women suicide bombers is not as great as it used to be. And I hate to say it, but maybe one of the biggest counter narratives is boredom. If people think that terrorism is boring, then they have to be heroes some other way.
Bravo.
I hope nobody was bored here. We have a question?
Chris, it's a perfect segue. So I'm wondering, why has ISIS, Al-Shabaab, fill in the blank, fallen from American headlines in particular? And what, are you concerned about that, or what do you all think about that?
What was the active, does it out of the headlines, or what was that?
They've fallen out of the headlines.
Yeah.
And are you concerned about that?
Well, I have two words for that. Donald Trump. He sucks all the oxygen out of the news cycle. And it's also what I was saying earlier. It's not news. Terrorism, it's horrible to say, but it's not news. There have been really pretty bad terrorist actions, even here in New York, in the last year. Nobody talks about it.
Yeah. I just want to add that for the larger, population in the U.S., you might feel like no one is talking about Al-Shabaab, but if you're in the Somali community, you're getting direct phone calls of family members who are sitting at a restaurant eating and just end up, in the middle of a bomb, right? So it definitely impacts a certain community. And I'm kind of actually disappointed that it's not, on the news as much. It's like we're so just like aghast with terrorism. It's like the school shootings that happen, right? School shooting happens, and there are ones that were just on the media for maybe just 48 hours, and like people just move on, or less. But it's also another factor is that probably people starting to realize that it's a generational effort, right? It's not like where you could send a military, take people out, right? We've tried that. It's an ideology, and to fight an ideology, I think you needed to do it academically. You need to do it on the ground. but also, like, you know, the media needs to play its role of, you know, showing, you know, what the realities are on the ground. However, there is a counter narrative to that as well. When you show too much Al-Shabaab, it tends to also radicalize people as well, right? Why are they always demeaning us, right? Why are they always showing us, like, on the media, right? Why are, you know, this school shooter not labeled a terrorist, right? So that itself also feeds into media bias, and that's how a lot of these sort of media biases end up in Al-Shabaab recruitment videos. And they show news cables, right? And they show US politicians or lawmakers saying negative things, right? And they use that as a recruitment method. So it's something that definitely needs to be looked at in a deeper manner.
Can I just say too, the video you saw of Salma, she told us, you know, in Belgium I was watching news, but anything the news says, I didn't trust it. You know, she's part of the Muslim community, and she's like, they always condemn Muslims. I didn't believe it. Anything they said about ISIS, no, I don't think it's true. That's scary.
I would also say that when the headlines really forget about terrorism, I get very nervous. In the mid-1990s, I was based in Cairo, and I was constantly writing for Newsweek, and I was constantly telling New York, we got to watch this bin Laden guy. He's really dangerous. And there's all this stuff going on, and there's all this anger out here, and I can tell you exactly how it works. And it was like, yeah, no, it's not really, we're not really thinking about that too much. I wound up writing a novel just to try and make it happen, because actually one of the things that concerned me is I realized there was a lot of racism involved in the reaction to a discussion of terrorism. So if I was writing about someone named Mohammed or Ahmed or whatever, I knew that editors in New York were essentially turning the page. And it wasn't, and so my novel was about a guy from a Bosnian background who's blonde, blue-eyed, 6 feet tall, and looks all American.
Did you name him Ardian?
Well, he does now. No, but his last name's Kurtovic, which is a good Bosnian name. But of course, the problem with social media is that there's really no way to control this. And we don't want to control it. But in the old days, you could talk to the responsible media and say, let's try and deal with this. But one of the things that's happened in the media over the years is that our job's gotten much more dangerous, basically because the bad guys don't need us anymore. In the old days, you would go to interview bin Laden, for instance, and you were the way he was going to get his message out. And now Al-Qaeda's got its own TV network. So that's a huge change in addressing the whole question of how the media relates to this and how the consumers of terrorist media relate to it. Because they don't have to go to CNN or the BBC. They go directly to the Al-Qaeda or ISIS networks.
And I think one more challenge that our community is dealing with. Last year we did a training for like over 40 parents on how do you identify, you know, radicalization and prevention and intervention. And a lot of the parents, here's what they said. They said, all of our kids have smartphones. But with all honesty, like if my son was watching the ISIS recruitment video, I wouldn't know. Even if you showed me, I would think it's a movie, right? So there is a huge generational gap, right? Sometimes you'll have a father and you have a son who having a hard time communicating because the son is speaking English, he's losing his native tongue, and the father is busy working, doesn't have much time to learn English, right? So that generation gap is what ISIS and extremist organizations, what they target. And they use Nike and Adidas and basketball and whatever sports that a lot of our youth are into in targeting them. So a lot of recruitment videos you'll see, you know, a recruiter or, you know, someone in the video wearing a Nike t-shirt. You can just do it, and they change their phrases. And that might trigger a youth who's already vulnerable and looking for a way out. So while we also, you know, trying to counter these narratives, I think a lot of our refugee and immigrant communities, especially parents, are in a very tough situation because they're not accustomed to this Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. They don't understand it.
I think we could go on, but I think we really have run out of time now. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank, is the ambassador still here? Or
She
she's
had to
gone?
leave.
She had to leave at 9 o'clock probably.
Well, she had other duties. She's
In any
an
case,
ambassador.
In any case, I want to thank all of you for coming. And I hope you learned something tonight. I certainly did. I think I feel greatly encouraged by the work that you all are doing.
Thank you.
And I'm going to be watching it closely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to thank all of you, too. If I could just thank all of you, because I know a lot of people in the room are doing work equal to what we're doing, and bravo to you, and keep it up, please. And anything we can do to support you, we're happy to do it. And again, thank you to our sponsors for this beautiful evening. Thank you to the Embassy of Qatar.
Thank you.